At 14 years old, my son, whom I had always thought of as a naive boy, surprised me when he discovered that his mother, the woman who promised to be faithful, had stolen the $15,000 from his college fund to support her lover. As I was shattered by the betrayal, he plotted a plan to expose her in front of everyone. On one fateful night during a family dinner, he revealed the truth, leaving the house in a deathly silence. Now we looked into each other's eyes, knowing that trust had crumbled in seconds. My name is Lucas. The pain of betrayal is never forgotten. The tension in the air was palpable, as if each breath was a reminder of what had happened. I, Lucas, felt a mix of relief and anguish. I had managed to reveal the truth, but the cost was high. My mother, Fernanda, looked like a ghost. Her eyes, once full of life, now seemed dull and lost. My father, Roberto, looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and pain, as if he were trying to understand how all this could have happened. The table was filled with untouched plates, and the atmosphere that had once been one of celebration and unity was now drenched in despair and treachery. I knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. I had not only lost trust in my mother, but also what was left of our family. The silence was only interrupted by the soft sounds of my own thoughts swirling like a whirlwind in my mind. I decided I couldn't let the situation unfold without a plan. With the help of my loyal friend Elisa, I thought of ways to move forward and regain control of my life. In the following days, I watched the everyday life of my house crumble. Fernanda tried to act normal, but her efforts were pathetic. She spoke about rebuilding and forgiveness, but I saw no sincerity in her words. Roberto, on the other hand, had become a shadow. He worked even more, as if he wanted to escape the problems at home, but that only deepened my anguish. I wished he could see that he needed support too. But I didn't know how to open that conversation with him. It was during a chat with Elisa that the idea began to take shape. She had always been a source of wisdom and courage for me. "Lucas, you have to use this to your advantage. Don't let this situation define who you are," she said with determination. That resonated with me. I needed to turn this pain into something productive. I focused on my studies and prepared my college applications, even without the money that had disappeared. I had to show everyone, especially myself, that I was stronger than the circumstances. I spoke with Roberto about the importance of my future. I explained that despite what was happening, I wanted to focus on college, and that even without financial support, I was determined to find a way to get what I needed. He seemed surprised by my attitude, and for a brief moment, a glimmer of pride appeared in his eyes. That gave me a boost. Roberto agreed to help me, even if it was just emotionally. In the following days, we began to have more meaningful conversations, and slowly he started to open his heart about how he felt regarding Fernanda. I decided it was time to confront my mother again. I scheduled a day for us to sit down and talk about what had happened. I needed to understand her reasons, or at least try. What I didn't expect was for her to show such vulnerability. When we confronted her, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Lucas, I made a colossal mistake, and this will haunt me forever," she said, her voice breaking. It was the first time I saw a glimpse of truth in her words. Although I wanted to scream and say everything I felt, I found within myself a strength to listen. As Fernanda explained her motivations, I realized that behind her betrayal was a lost woman struggling with her own insecurities. Not that it justified her actions, but at least it helped me see a different side of her. Memories from my childhood flooded my mind, when everything seemed simpler, and I wondered if one day we could recover what we had lost. The conversation was tense, but in the end, I decided that I wouldn't forgive easily, but giving a chance for dialogue seemed like a first step. Elisa's support continued to be crucial. I kept her updated on every small progress, every new conversation I had with my parents. She always found encouraging words and reminded me of what was most important, my future. Together, we decided that I should apply for a scholarship. With the grades I had achieved, there was no doubt I could be accepted, But the challenge of overcoming my mother's betrayal still loomed over me. In this process, I found a new passion for studying and preparing. Focusing on my goals gave me a sense of purpose, something I was losing in the emotional chaos unfolding at home. Each new academic achievement was a victory that made me feel like I was regaining control of my life. Meanwhile, my relationship with Roberto grew stronger, and we began planning our steps toward the future, even though it wasn't easy. As the days passed, life seemed to find a new rhythm. However, deep down, I knew that the wound from the betrayal would never fully heal, but the idea of reconciliation was emerging. I didn't want my mother's betrayal to define who I was or how I would view love and family. I decided that if there was a chance to rebuild, it was my duty to try, for myself and for Roberto. Life continued, and I was determined to carve my own path, regardless of the shadows that lingered around our home. In the following days, the tension at home was palpable. Fernanda tried to act normally, but every smile seemed forced, as if she were performing in a play she could no longer act. I watched from my corner, witnessing her internal struggle between guilt and the need to carry on with her life as if nothing had happened. It was painful to see how someone who should have been my pillar was so lost. I decided that instead of letting anger consume me, I would seek to understand. What had driven my mother to make such a decision? At the same time, I couldn't help but feel betrayed, not just by the theft of money, but by the breach of trust I had in her. I knew I had to reach out to Roberto and create a safe space for both of us. During dinner, I tried to talk to him about what was happening, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. He, always so dedicated, was so absorbed in his work that he didn't see the pain in my eyes. So I gathered my courage and told him I needed his support more than ever. Roberto looked at me, surprised, and I realized he was also struggling with his own emotions. In that moment, we decided we should unite to face the situation. Elisa became my confidant, a light in the darkness. We talked for long hours on a park bench where we used to spend summer afternoons. She listened intently as I vented about Fernanda's betrayal and what it meant for me. "Lucas, you don't have to carry this alone," she said with an understanding look. Her words were like a balm for my soul. Sometimes people fail, but that doesn't define who you are. What matters is how you deal with it. That conversation brought me a new perspective. With Elisa's support and my newly discovered alliance with Roberto, I devised a plan. I needed to recover the money my mother had taken, but not only that, I wanted to make Fernanda realize the seriousness of her actions and the consequences they would have on our lives. Through a series of discreet conversations, I managed to gather information about her relationship. I discovered the lover's name and some of his routines. What had once seemed a dark labyrinth was beginning to illuminate. One night, while Fernanda was out, I decided it was time to act. Roberto had agreed with my idea of confronting her, but carefully. We didn't want her to feel attacked, but it was necessary for her to understand the impact of her choices. Armed with courage, I created a simple document where I listed everything I had lost due to her decisions. The money, of course, was the least important in the end. What really hurt was the distrust that now permeated our relationship. When Fernanda returned, I noticed something had changed in her. There was a tired expression on her face, and the way she looked at me held a mix of guilt and defensiveness. I was ready to speak. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Roberto joined us, and the room fell silent. She realized we were united in our dissatisfaction, and it visibly made her uncomfortable. I spoke about how I felt, about the dreams I had, and how her betrayal had not only stolen our money, but also the trust between us. Fernanda tried to justify herself, claiming she was lost and couldn't find her way back. But her words were not enough. I knew the truth ran much deeper. "You chose this path, Mom, and now we need to find a way to fix this," I declared, trying to remain calm. Roberto also did his part, reminding her of all they had built together, how love should be a daily choice, not an act of impulsiveness. Fernanda, shaken, finally seemed to begin to comprehend how much her actions were affecting us. Seeing her fragility made me want to comfort her, but the pain was still fresh and hard to ignore. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Fernanda began to distance herself from her lover, a small but significant step. The road to reconciliation was long, and I knew it would require time and patience. Roberto encouraged me to continue my studies, despite the obstacles. He always believed in me, and that became clearer and clearer. I decided I needed a new goal to focus on, something that would bring me joy and purpose while I tried to cope with my new reality. Elisa was always by my side, encouraging me not to give up. Together, we decided I could get involved in extracurricular activities at school where I could make new friends and strengthen my future. Taking her advice, I signed up for a debate club where I could express my feelings and, at the same time, develop skills that would be valuable for college. It was a way to channel my anger and frustration into something productive. As time went on, I realized that the truth, although painful, could be the path to healing. My relationship with my mother was still fragile, but each passing day brought a new opportunity to rebuild trust. I was determined not to let her mistake define me. Love and forgiveness, though difficult, were becoming the center of my reflections. What I truly wanted was a restored family, a new chance to understand each other, and above all, to learn from our mistakes. If you are following my story, know that each of our journeys is unique, and forgiveness can be the first step toward freedom. If you enjoyed this and want to know how it unfolds, subscribe to follow the next chapters. When Fernanda left the house that morning, I already knew she wouldn't be back anytime soon. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the house were adjusting to the new normal of distrust and resentment. I felt torn, unable to comprehend how the woman who raised me and always said she loved me could commit such a treacherous act. Meanwhile, Roberto tried to carry on with the routine as if nothing had changed, but I could see in his eyes a deep sadness, a tremor that could not be hidden. I decided I wouldn't let the situation consume me. The anger I felt towards Fernanda was transforming into something more useful, a plan. Although I knew it was wrong to manipulate my mother, the need to secure my future and recover what was mine motivated me. I went to my room and started thinking about how I could act. Elisa always said that the best way to deal with problems was to face them head-on. But in this case, I needed a different approach. The next day, I met Elisa at the park after school. Her smile brightened my day, even amid the chaos. "You look thoughtful, Lucas. What's going on?" she asked as we sat on a bench under a leafy tree. I decided to lay it all out and share the delicate situation I was in. After hearing my story, Elisa fell silent, looking down at the ground. "That's very unfair, but you can't let that define who you are," she finally said, lifting her gaze. Her words gave me a new sense of purpose. Maybe I wasn't alone in this fight. Together, we thought of strategies to expose the truth. Deep down, I knew it wasn't just about the college money, but about the broken promises and the lack of trust that now permeated our family. A plan began to take shape in my mind. I thought about how I could make Fernanda realize the consequences of her actions. I decided I would confront her, but not before gathering evidence. I needed something that would make her see what she had done. And for my father to understand that her betrayal wasn't just a personal failure, but a blow to all of us. I took the following days to observe Fernanda and her interactions. Whenever she went out, I would note down snippets of conversations she had on the phone, and when I thought she wasn't paying attention, I would listen to her calls. The more I listened, the more I realized how deeply she was immersed in this new life, completely forgetting about me and Roberto. The emptiness in my heart was filled with a sense of duty. I had to do something. It was then that I decided to follow Fernanda one of her outings. With a borrowed camera from Elisa, I hid in a strategic spot and waited. My heart raced not only from the fear of being discovered, but also from the anticipation of finally having proof that I wasn't just imagining things. When I saw her meet with the lover, a wave of emotions washed over me: anger, sadness, and a certain relief at finally confirming what I had suspected. With the images in hand, I returned home and sought out Roberto. He was in the living room, lost in thought, and I realized it was time. "Dad, I need to show you something," I said, handing him the camera. The look he cast at me was one of concern and curiosity. As he began to watch the video, I saw his expression shift from confusion to disbelief. He looked lost, as if each second of that recording was tearing apart his illusion that everything was okay. "Lucas, this is serious," he finally said, his voice faltering. The fragility of the moment made my heart weigh even heavier. "I don't know what to say. Your mother, she..." Roberto hesitated, shaking his head as if trying to shake off an unbearable reality. "I don't know if I can handle this right now." Seeing him so affected, I realized that, like me, he was also dealing with his own pain. I understood that it wasn't just Fernanda's betrayal that hurt us, but the destruction of everything we believed a family to be. "We need to face this together, Dad. We can't let this tear us apart," I declared, searching for the strength I knew still existed between us. He nodded slowly, determination beginning to emerge in his eyes. We needed a plan, and together we could find a way to deal with the truth. With the certainty that communication and honesty were essential, we decided it was time to confront Fernanda. The days that followed were heavy. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the house were breathing to a different rhythm, laden with expectations and fears. I felt that at any moment everything could explode, but there was a part of me that longed for this confrontation. We needed answers, closure. The feeling of helplessness consumed me, and I knew that regardless of what happened, I could not turn back. Finally, we decided it was time. The night fell, and the atmosphere in the living room was charged. When Fernanda walked in, the silence was deafening. The look we exchanged was like an electric shock. I saw her, but I no longer recognized her. "We need to talk," Roberto said, his voice firm yet trembling. She hesitated, but there was no way to escape. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins. "You know we found out about you and..." Roberto began, but Fernanda interrupted him. "It's not what you think. I can explain." Her defense was automatic, but the tone of her voice lacked the confidence it once had. I couldn't hide my frustration. "You broke the trust we had, Mom. How could you do this to us?" The words came out like a confession, a mix of pain and the need for understanding. Fernanda's gaze softened, but the coldness of her betrayal still lingered between us. I was lost," she confessed, her voice now quieter. "I didn't know how to deal with all this, with the pressures of work, of life. I wanted to feel something different." The sincerity in her words made me feel a small thread of empathy. But the anger quickly returned. "And does that justify what you did?" I asked, trying to understand how she could rationalize her betrayal. The confrontation turned into a painful conversation where each of us exposed our wounds. What began as an attack transformed into a debate about love, expectations, and human failures. Deep down, I realized that Fernanda's betrayal wasn't just an act of disloyalty, but a reflection of her own internal struggle. And at the same time, Roberto's pain was palpable, as if he were unraveling with each word. The night advanced, and although the answers were still unclear, there was a sense of relief in the air. The conversation had opened a space for vulnerability, and for a brief moment, I could see the woman who had raised me, the mother who always tried to protect me. However, it was a fragile connection, and I knew the journey ahead would be long and full of challenges. With a heavy heart, but filled with hope, we were ready to face whatever was necessary, determined to restore the trust we had lost. We knew the road would be difficult, but life is made of new beginnings, and somehow we were determined to find a new path. As the days passed, the reality of our situation began to settle deeper within me. My mother's betrayal wasn't just a financial blow, it was an emotional scar that left me feeling helpless, as if the ground beneath my feet had crumbled. I knew I had to be strong, but the pain I felt was intense. Conversations with my father, Roberto, became my only source of comfort. He, with his unwavering patience and love, listened to every outpouring of my emotions, even when the words came out between tears. What impressed me most was his ability to remain steadfast, even amid the chaos we had to face. Together, we decided we wouldn't let Fernanda's mistake destroy us. The love my father had for me was a pillar I could lean on. One night, while reviewing my notes for school, an idea emerged. I could use the situation to my advantage, not only to recover what had been lost, but also to understand more about my mother. Why had she made that decision? What led her to betray our father and leave us in such a vulnerable state? My plan involved Elisa, my loyal friend, who was always by my side. With her, I began to articulate a strategy to get closer to Fernanda, not only to recover the money, but also to seek answers. My heart raced at the thought of the scene, but I knew I needed courage to face whatever would be revealed. The next day, I suggested to Elisa that we meet in the park after school. I want to understand my mother, I told her, feeling a mix of anxiety and determination. Elisa, with her ever-understanding nature, agreed to help. We'll figure out what's going on, Lucas, but we'll do it smartly. The plan was simple. Talk to Fernanda in a way that wasn't confrontational, but would make her open up. I knew she was as lost as I was, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was a spark of humanity that could still be accessed. Over the weekend, I chose a moment when Fernanda was relaxing on the couch, engrossed in her favorite series. "Hey Mom, can I talk to you?" I asked, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. She looked at me, surprised, but nodded. I sat down beside her, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stop. "I just want to understand what happened, why you did what you did," I said, looking into her eyes. Her expression changed, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her facade. Fernanda sighed, seeming on the verge of tears. "Lucas, I don't want to hurt you anymore. I'm confused and regretful." My words intertwined with hers as I tried to stay strong. "But you deceived me, Mom. You broke our trust." She began to open up about her dissatisfaction in the marriage, her insecurities, and the emptiness she felt. I realized that, somehow, she too was a victim of her own choices. Understanding began to form between us. But it wasn't enough to erase the pain her betrayal had caused. The conversation took an unexpected turn, and I realized that to move forward, we would need to face the truth about our feelings together. It was an opportunity to rebuild, and I was willing to try. However, the hardest part was yet to come. I decided it was time to bring Roberto into this conversation because he also deserved to know what was happening. My mother, upon hearing this, turned pale, as if the weight of reality had hit her. "Lucas, this could be a mistake," she said, but I knew it was a necessary step. The next day, I called my father for lunch and invited him to come home early. "Dad, we need to have a family talk," I said, trying to remain calm. When we were all gathered in the living room, the atmosphere was tense. Roberto looked at me, suspicious, and then at Fernanda, who already seemed nervous. "What's going on?" he asked, his gaze alternating between us. "We need to talk about what happened with the college money and everything that's going on between you two," I replied. The conversation began to flow, but not without resistance. Fernanda tried to justify her actions, but Roberto's honesty was clear and direct. He expressed his pain and disappointment, and each word carried the weight of years of dedication and love. However, what surprised me the most was how he also expressed his willingness to listen. He wanted to understand, just like I did. The dynamic that formed in the room was painful but necessary. I sensed that the truth, no matter how difficult, was finally being revealed. Fernanda's tears began to fall, and guilt consumed her. "I'm so sorry, Roberto," she said, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of hope. The conversation could be the start of a path to reconciliation, but that would require effort from all of us. The pain of betrayal would never completely disappear, but perhaps, with time, we could find a way to move forward. I knew we needed patience and love, and as I listened to my parents, I felt that even among the tears, a new chapter was about to begin for our family. With a heavy heart, I watched my father and mother exchanging words laden with emotion. I wanted this conversation to be the solution to our problems, but a part of me knew that the road would be long and complicated. Fernanda, with her tear-filled eyes, tried to justify her actions, but her words sounded hollow. I felt as if I were living in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The love I had nurtured for my mother was now mingled with anger and betrayal that she had inflicted upon me. Elisa, my best friend, had always been by my side and knew I was going through a tough time. In a gesture of friendship, she suggested we do something fun to try to take my mind off the chaos engulfing my life. The idea of taking a walk in the park seemed strange, but I would welcome any distraction that allowed me to forget, even for a few hours, the family tension surrounding me. Upon arriving, the sunlight filtered through the trees, creating a beautiful scene, but I still felt the weight of the situation in the back of my mind. As we walked, Elisa began talking about her own challenges at school, and for a moment, I managed to focus on something else. The stories she shared were funny and full of energy, and they made me laugh. Our bond seemed to grow stronger with each laugh. However, amid the lightness, I couldn't ignore the reality waiting for me at home. When I returned home, the atmosphere was tense and heavy. The conversation between my parents still echoed in my mind, and I knew we needed more than words to heal the open wounds. That night, I decided to meet with my father to discuss how we could face this situation. Roberto had always been my safe harbor, someone I could trust without hesitation. He was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand, his gaze lost in some distant point. When he saw me, his eyes lit up a little, but quickly dimmed, reminding him of the reality that surrounded us. "Lucas," he began, "I know this is hard, but we need to keep our heads up. You are strong, and I want you to know that I'm here for you." I felt a wave of gratitude for his words. That small gesture of support meant the world to me. The conversation soon turned into an open dialogue about our expectations for the future. Roberto told me about his dreams of seeing me in college, and that gave me a burst of hope. He was willing to fight for me, and I knew I had to do the same. With a plan in mind, I decided I wouldn't let Fernanda's mistake destroy my future. The next day, I woke up determined. I needed to act, and the first step would be to confront my mother. When Fernanda came down for breakfast, the atmosphere was uncomfortable. I looked into her eyes, trying to see the woman I once knew. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened," I said, trying to keep calm. She hesitated, but nodded, and we sat at the table. I needed her to understand the gravity of what she had done. I explained how I felt betrayed, not just by the theft of my money, but by the lack of consideration for my dreams. Fernanda started to cry, and a part of me wanted to comfort her, but the pain was too recent. "I was wrong, Lucas. I know I have no excuses, but I want you to know that," she began to say, but I interrupted. "Mom, I don't want to hear empty apologies. I want to understand why you did this. What does he have that I don't?" Upon hearing this, she bit her lower lip, clearly struggling with her emotions. The silence that followed was deafening, but I stood my ground. I wanted her to understand the impact of her actions. After a long moment, Fernanda finally spoke. "I got lost, Lucas. I'm not trying to justify it, but I'm not perfect. What I did was wrong, and now I'm paying the price." Her gaze was one of despair, and I realized that in her confusion, there was a fragility. However, that didn't lessen the wound I carried. "Mom, I just want to know if you still believe in me and my dreams. I want you to help me rebuild trust. I pleaded, feeling that forgiveness could be a path to healing. She nodded slowly, and for the first time, I could see a small ray of hope in her eyes. "I promise I will do whatever it takes to make things right," she whispered, and even though I was still reluctant, something inside me began to calm. It was a start, and I was willing to give it a chance. By the end of the conversation, something had changed. Although a barrier still existed between us, the dialogue had opened a space for rebuilding. From that moment on, my life wouldn't just be about what Fernanda had done, but about how I could shape my future. With my father's support and my mother's willingness to change, I felt there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And who knows? Maybe one day our family could find new meaning in love and trust. If you've been through a similar situation, share your story. Sharing experiences can bring light in times of darkness. The next day brought a new perspective. I woke up with my mind swirling with ideas on how to confront my mother, but something within me told me that dialogue would be more effective than a direct confrontation. Fernanda had made decisions that changed our lives, but I believed there was still a chance for us to find a path to reconciliation. The bond I had with my father, Roberto, had become a pillar of strength, and he always supported me in the decisions I made. That morning, I decided to speak with him before approaching my mother. When I came down for breakfast, I found Roberto sitting at the table with a thoughtful expression. He was clearly worried about the situation, and in his expression, I saw a mix of sadness and determination. After we greeted each other, I grabbed a glass of juice and sat next to him. "Dad, have you thought about what we can do to resolve this situation with Mom?" I asked, trying to open the conversation. Roberto took a deep breath and replied that honesty had always been the best approach, even in tough times. He emphasized the importance of speaking to Fernanda as a family without accusations, but with the intention of understanding her point of view and showing how her actions had affected us. With a clearer mind after our conversation, I decided it was time to act. That very day, I met Elisa at the park, the place where we always gathered after school. She noticed that something was off, and when she asked, I couldn't hold back my emotions. I talked about my mother's betrayal, about how I felt betrayed and insecure about the future. Elisa listened attentively, and when I finished, she offered her unconditional support. "You are stronger than you think, Lucas. What matters is that you don't let the situation define who you are," she said with an encouraging smile. The conversation with Elisa made me reflect on the strength I could find within myself. I returned home determined to have an honest conversation with my mother, but I still felt a bit anxious. Upon arriving, I saw Fernanda in the living room with a distant look, as if she were lost in her thoughts. My hesitation almost made me retreat, but I remembered Roberto's and Elisa's words. Courage began to take over me. "Mom, we need to talk," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Fernanda turned, surprised and a bit apprehensive. She asked me to sit down, and in that moment, I realized that the pain she felt wasn't just about the situation, but about the weight of her choices. The conversation flowed in a way I didn't expect. I laid out how I felt betrayed and how her decisions impacted my future. But I also made it clear that I still loved her, despite everything. Fernanda, with tears in her eyes, confessed that she was lost and that her decision to steal the money wasn't just about me or the lover, but a way to escape a life she felt was suffocating. Her sincerity surprised me. I didn't expect her to open up so much. As we talked, I realized that betrayal wasn't the only theme, but a search for something that both of us were losing. In the end, she committed to seeking help and to talk to my father about how she could repair the damage she caused. The conversation didn't resolve everything, but it was an important step. I felt that somehow we were beginning to rebuild the bonds that had been broken. In the following days, I noticed subtle changes in Fernanda. She started to dedicate herself more to the home and to be more present. The atmosphere in the house was far from perfect, but her willingness to face the situation gave me hope. Roberto, in turn, also became more receptive, which made me realize that together we could overcome this phase. Meanwhile, I kept my friendship with Elisa strong. Our conversations became a refuge where we could share our insecurities and dreams for the future. I didn't know how my future would be shaped by all this, but one thing was certain: the experience made me mature quickly. I learned that love and forgiveness are complex but essential. Life isn't linear, and human relationships are full of nuances. One day, while studying in my room, I received a message from Elisa asking if I wanted to go to the movies. The idea of relaxing a bit seemed welcome, so I accepted. When we met, I realized I needed some time for myself, away from the family tensions. The film we watched made me reflect on challenges and overcoming them, and as we left, I felt the weight on my chest had lessened. We talked about our dreams and what we wanted for the future. Walking down the sidewalk, Elisa mentioned that life is made of ups and downs, and that it's normal to feel lost sometimes. I agreed, recognizing that I was more prepared to face the challenges ahead. When I got home, I realized the road ahead would still be difficult, but I was determined not to let the past shape my future. Instead, I wanted to learn from it, to use this experience to grow and understand the people around me better. The journey was just beginning, and as I looked out the window, I felt that hope was renewing, along with the possibility of a brighter future for me and my family.